Jamie Job.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I was chatting with Mero Taylor about something I had done, had written, and I'm going to talk to you mostly as a writer today. Is anybody in here in this room a writer, or live with a writer, or have to deal with a brother or a sister who's a writer? You do?
My sister was.
And so you have some sense of the process and the paying attention to life and all that stuff. And the question, what if? Okay.
And
What
don't
if?
bother me.
Don't bother me. Okay, that goes without saying. Also, Harriet Burke was brought up here, and I just want to let you know that she holds a deep, deep spot in my heart. I'm sure she does with everybody in this room. She helped me with not specifically what I'm writing here, but a lot of my studies at Martinez. I want to read you a page from what I wrote, and then we'll start the discussion from that. This is Act 1, Scene 1. It's set on the clipper Rosalia. Early morning, it's fog. Mike emerges from the wheelhouse onto the deck. We see a projection 1953 and a foghorn. Mike is speaking to us. I don't want to be here telling you this, because it's not true. Most of it. We just made it up. Only true parts of the fish, the nets, the knots, and the location where it actually didn't happen, which is here on the shoreline where we grew up. Our hometown came to life for California's gold rush. 50 years later, Papa moved here to fish the strait on a marsh built almost overnight by silt from those gold mines. Our family immigrated from the northwest coast of Sicily, and everyone knew how to fish for steady money. Most of us settled on Grangers Wharf to do just that. Our shoreline became San Francisco's backbone, where the young city got its goods. Not only the fish, but also the fruit, the nuts, the vegetables, the coal, the gas, the steel, the sugar, the flour, the lumber, the lead, the copper, the dynamite, the bricks, the canned goods, the cement, the dairy products, the chemicals, the mineral water, not to mention all the labor needed to produce that wealth so far away from our island home. So let's return to Grangers Wharf in the middle of the 20th century, back in the day of Pogey and Hoagie before World War II. The house where we were born burned down 3 years after the bomb. Since then, it's harder for us pescatores to catch a living in our gillnets. The lights come up and Mike enters the wheelhouse. This is the introduction to Joe Fish Ties the Knot, or Last Gillnet on Grangers Wharf. And I'll just read the little summary of this. It's a play I wrote that never produced. It was read in San Francisco, here in Martinez twice by professional actors, but it's a hard sell in a world where people take pictures of their coffee all the time. When you fish for a living but have only one boat, you picked a rough way to make a buck. Just ask brothers Mike and Joe Pescatori, aka Mike and Joe Fish, from Grangers Wharf. When your family lives off the water, you enjoy no comforts of union, like the rest of the blue class workers on the shoreline, and especially in 1953, when the California fishing game is considering terminating your livelihood by outlawing gillnets in Carquinez Strait. Further complicating matters is a two-timing widow who, of course, returns to town, Norma Jean. She now lives across the street. What ensues is a cannery of worms, so to speak, run by her flickered fame, the county sheriff's captain, along with his bebop bandmates, a pair of wharf rats embroiled in smooth criminal shakedown that accounts for more than one frantic rumble up and down Snake Road, not to mention the Devil's Lounge, Napa State Hospital, and IRS visitations. Or a creek monkey with a smoking problem and a desperate race against fate all the way to Lover's Point. All right, well that's what if. What if Joe DiMaggio's sister, age 7, had not walked onto the railroad tracks back in 1920 something and got hit in the eye with a hot coal, and the eye was so damaged that Dr. Merrithew, the doctor of the ditch as they called him, the only doctor who would go down there, could not treat it. So Rosalia had to take Francis to San Francisco so frequently that she finally said, please, we have to move. Take the family, we'll live in North Beach, we'll fish from there. That's why we have 3 DiMaggio baseball players. They learned to play ball on the streets of San Francisco. Here, I'm pretty sure Joe never would have played ball. He wouldn't even made the high school team because he couldn't even go to high school. He wasn't interested. So I took baseball and Hollywood out of the story of Norma Jean and Joe, which 60 years ago, many of us knew that was a front page story. And I saw the real tragic nature of those 2 people without any kind of fame, and how it would have been here slugging on that kind of life. And it's set in the mid-50s when the nets are being pulled back. I do want to say to you that I went fishing once and I quit that day. I was a kid, I baited the worm, I did all that, the bait kept missing. Finally I yanked the hook out of the water and grabbed a bluegill right through the middle of the gut. And I said, this is not fair. It just turned me against fishing. So what I know about fishing is filtered through several people, primarily Harlan Bailey. Most of you might have heard of Harlan. He was our fisher poet and one of the last commercial fishermen around here. He was so generous with his time to me. We would just walk around and talk about what they would do on one of these clipper ships. But maybe I should start looking at this. Because why don't you go back to the beginning?
I'm ready to stop.
Yeah, why don't you go back to the beginning? We'll start with we'll look at the pictures.
One moment.
Okay.
There's a step that I need to do, and then that is to put it on pause, and then you tell me where.
Just right at the beginning.
To start.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know which.
Okay, keep going. Yeah, we're filtering right through right there, back to that one with the next one back. This is was taken at Eagle Marine at the right time of day when the sun just hit the top of the mast there. And Harlan and I were over there. We found the last remaining Martinez. It was a Monterey Clipper. These were the kind of boats that the Sicilian fishermen would have used. But go to the next photo. These were motorized. This is the original back turn of the century 1900 felucca with a single sail, but the picture is very dramatic because it shows tall ships in Carquinez Strait. What happened that the tall ships, go ahead and we can look and see what happened to that one right there, which is what, the Forester?
Yes.
And the next one where it's just into the ground.
Wow.
Several things occurred that were quite dramatic. 1950 gold rush floods, that's just mentioned in the text here. So much of the blasting of the soil up there that the rains brought a lot of sediment down here, and that occurred and increased the shoreline. If you, I think on the next picture we show where the shoreline. Yes, this is the railroad. Snake. This is Grangers Wharf coming out with, you can see the boats, the cannery, and there's the Forester. Most of this soil here was a result of starting in the gold rush forward of siltation. A lot of it came in floods here in Contra Costa County in the 1860s, and then there was drought, and that was a result of changing the farming tactics from, the land went from bunch grasses to annual grasses and cattle and agriculture, and that created a ground that shed the water in the land a lot faster. And so all of the parks are a result of that growing, and this marsh here is what attracted the Sicilians, which overfished it, and 50 years later, the Gillnets were scotched. So it's a pretty stunning story. You can keep moving forward, I guess. This is a closer look at how this community was and how, Igor, you may know about this as well. This was not a very easy place to go to if you were a kid back a few years back, right? It was a kind of scary place.
I'm not quite that old.
Oh, okay, all right. All right, good. That's pretty good. That's the right answer. Older people than Igor have told me. But you didn't want to go down there. It was kind of like East Oakland.
Give me a landmark. Is this Grangers Wharf?
This is yes, this is Alhambra coming right down here, feeding out right out to the water. And the canary up there, the cannery. And so these are the little Monterey clippers,
Yeah.
which are the same that you see in Fisherman's Wharf. And by the way, Joe DiMaggio was called the Clipper because sports writers thought he moved through center field like one of these ships, just gliding. Anyway, what I learned, and I got a lot of help from this, not just Harlan. The athletic department at Alhambra High School let me see the yearbook. I wanted to see the ethnic makeup of the 1933 baseball team, and what if Joe had any kind of chance. And further research proved he probably wouldn't have gone to school at all. So in my play, he's hitting baseballs into the water, and that's all that we know about that. There was something, though, that occurred, and it's mentioned here, this essence of the labor involved. And this didn't occur in Martinez, it occurred in Crockett. But has anyone here heard of the Sugar War, 1938? Okay, I would think you would know about it.
Is this where the
Union
Yeah.
busting heads.
Yes.
I refer to that in this play where the fishermen are talking about that from the point of view of below that level of laborer. They have a union, but it ain't very good. And so they talk about their father going down and observing this and making this observation about how that occurs. And the sense I had in writing that and understanding about how these folks in this ghetto really didn't live in town. They lived on the water and out there, and they were that's why they were a little scary, I think, to some people. And my story gets into a lot of, as you heard from the précis there, it gets into all this little local lore of things like the Alhambra water plant fire and nasty shenanigans among, public officials. But now we know that fishing here is pretty much fished out. Harlan told me when he was active in the bait shop business, there were 3 bait shops in town in the 1960s for just the casual fishermen. But now there's only one, and most of the fish has declined further, and people are out there with their fish finders. It's become less of a sport, more of a...
Harlan ran one of those bait shops.
Yes, right, exactly. So let's go forward in the pictures and keep, because these do tell a lot. By the way, Julian Fraser helped get these for me, so I appreciate his help. This is the ferry terminal, and this was the way before the bridges were in. And that's one reason, the bridges weren't existing when Francis DiMaggio got hit in the eye, so that's one reason they had to move. But that was when you could only get a car across the strait over here on a ferry. Next one. This is a closer view of what Grangers Wharf looked like with the cannery and the ferry up there, and then that is the existing railroad bridge over to Benicia with the railroad tracks here. Again, you can see how much soil showed up there after the gold rush and the great
I have a question.
drought here, yes.
Is the cannery, is that the buildings that are there across Van Tree?
You know, that's a really good question. It doesn't look like this is a separate structure because of the peaked roofs, but those domed buildings that look like Warner Brothers studios that have sports complexes in them, I don't think that was part of the cannery.
Those are all gone.
No, the two that are there
And
now,
the concrete ones are where that is now.
they were part of the cannery? Were they part of the cannery then?
It's my understanding
Okay.
that these were part of the cannery.
Yes.
But those are gone and they rebuilt
Ah.
two big structures
see.
with stand-up concrete walls.
Okay, all right. The thing to know is that the tall ships came all the way right up here.
That was before.
It was before the siltation, you know, the siltation is a problem currently now for, heck, yachters. But, and grain went from here, it was Grangers Wharf as a grain wharf, not a fishing place. The grain went from here to England, out of the great granary of this breadbasket of California. So really landscapes tell stories, and the edges of things in landscapes are always the most interesting, and the shoreline is an edge, and I know that there was a lot of shrimp along here and herring fishing. There quite a lot of industry, but it wasn't. I think that's what's on this list. You know, there coal from out in East Bay and steel mill out there, and flour was made in the sugar mill and before that, and the dynamite over in Rodeo, and it's really interesting to see that has over time become kind of an artifact of just kind of footprints. And but they do. I went around almost all of them and just had a feel for what that was like and what that really meant to the people that I was trying to write about. Because I'm not from here. I've only lived in Martinez 22 years, and so you know what that means. I'm just a real young person.
So you're talking about grain routes. The big grain route was between Port Costa and Benicia, and they had ferries that carried trains that carried this grain. This
Yes.
is what the warehouse cafe and
Yes,
Port Costa
yes.
and all of that.
Right, and that was an extensive out into the water development, right? Most of that has disappeared. If we go forward, we get to Port Costa.
Now?
It was one. Yeah, go ahead and we'll see. There it is, right here. So here's the school, the main street going down, but you can see up there all this remnants of actually I should start pulling books out, because these are not the best of the pictures. There's a lot of photographs and a lot of, if you really want to pursue this, you can, I recommend several of these things, including this series of books, which you know from, there's one on Crockett and Martinez that were useful to me, but also the maritime Contra Costa County is full of
I've not seen that one.
very, very well documented captions of things. And I do have copies of the play if anybody wants to read it. It's yes.
I just want to mention that from this picture, if you were to turn around and look back uphill, there's the reservoir up there.
Yes.
And the reservoir was to trap the water that was used by the various steam engines that were loading and unloading the ships down there.
Oh, okay.
And the Resource Conservation District a few years ago participated in a restoration project to where that's now a viable little lake again.
Let me ask you this, Igor, because you're probably aware of another one that was out in Castle Rock, Walnut Creek.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That was a hydroelectric plant, correct?
I don't know
back
that.
at the turn.
Could be.
Pepita, who is buried up here in the cemetery, lived in Walnut Creek for a short period of time on a large ranch. She was famous as being the fan dancer, the lady who danced.